pretty much means that the Penguins are going to protect Brandon Tanev, and I honestly thought that they could have just let him exposed. I don't think Seattle touches that contract because although I think Brandon Tanev is valuable to us, I don't think other teams look at that 4-year, $3.5 million contract as something they want to touch. I'm not going to lie, I didn't see this coming at all. It looks like Seattle will be taking Brandon Tanev and his 4-year, $3.5 million contract. In just the last week, I've said this so many times that I didn't even think Seattle was going to look at that 4-year, $3.5 million deal. I thought there were better options available. I really thought they were going to go for Zach Aston-Reese. He's an RFA, so you have his rights. You can sign him to whatever you want to sign him to, and he's going to be a serviceable bottom six player for your team. A great defensive forward, and because it's Seattle, who won't have much depth, they could have put him on the top six, and who knows, maybe he surprises, turns into the next Jonathan Marchessault or Riley Smith or William Karlsson. Or they could have went with Marcus Pettersson, who is a bit more expensive, but he's still 25, not too young, but he's not that old. He still has a few years of developing. And then there was Jason Zucker, who is the most expensive from the players I just mentioned, but I think is the most talented. Yes, he had a very disappointing season last year, but every other season before that, he's been solid. He's a proven 30-goal scorer. You know, with a new expansion team, you put him on your first line and maybe he recreates that magic, gets another 30-goal season. You know, you never know. He's a bit expensive, but there's an upside there with him. Those were the top three that I thought they were going to go with. They didn't even touch any of them. They go with Brandon Tanev, who I thought they looked at as a bad contract. Doesn't look like it. It seems like they want to play that in-your-face, you know, full of speed type of game, a little bit of grit. And, you know, who better than Brandon Tanev for that system? Now, before I even say anything, I want to thank Brandon Tanev for a great 2 seasons here. A lot of people didn't like that contract, and obviously I wasn't crazy about it when it was first signed, but when I first saw him touch the ice as a Penguin, I loved him from day one. I had no problem with the 6-year deal. The $3.5 million was a bit much, but even then, for what he provided, the energy, I loved everything about it. Again, I love Brandon Tanev, but to think that you're getting rid of a 29-year-old who's still 4 years left on his deal at $3.5 million. You're just getting rid of it for nothing. I thought to trade that contract, you would have to entice the other team, right? Throw a pick or a prospect. The fact that you get rid of it and you don't have to do anything, again, on the ice, it's a big loss, but you know, freeing up that cap and the term is just huge. And as much as I love that Blueger, Czar, and Tanev line, that was one of our better lines we've seen over the last couple of years. I still think that line can be great. I think Czar and Blueger are going to run that line, and I think you can either sign a replacement or even just look within your system and find a pretty cheap option to put there. Just looking within the system, I think the best player to throw there is Freddie Gaudreau. He had great speed, and he was actually a very good bottom six player. He makes about $3 million less than what Tanev is making. But again, look at the difference. Let's say he signs for $1 million. You have a $1 million player versus a $3.5 million player. He won't bring the same speed and grit and just what Tanev brings to the locker room, but on the ice, I think maybe the production won't be too far off for a way cheaper price. At the end of the day, these are bottom six players who, you know, have seen a little bit of time in the top six that I think are replaceable. And I know it doesn't seem like it, but just look at this. Back in 2017, in the Vegas expansion, the Penguins obviously lost Fleury, and in that same free agency, they lose Nick Bonino, Trevor Daley, Matt Cullen, Chris Kunitz, Ron Hainsey, who was a rental. But what I'm trying to say is they lost a lot of players who helped build a back-to-back championship team. Players that you knew were going to be incredibly tough to replace, right? Nick Bonino, perfect third-line center. Matt Cullen, perfect fourth-line center. Trevor Daley, your perfect top four, you know, puck-moving defenseman. Right now, it seems like you're losing a lot, but if you look at the bigger picture, what have the Penguins really done with Jared McCann and Brandon Tanev in their lineup? I'm not blaming them for the failures. Honestly, it shouldn't be that hard to replace. I know what they bring in and game out, but when you look at the bigger picture, like I said, look at what they've done in the playoffs. In a total of 5 playoff series with the Penguins, combined Brandon Tanev and Jared McCann in 22 playoff games, 1 goal, 5 points. Jared McCann has played in 3 playoff rounds, all first round exits. I'm not saying it's his fault, but again, 1 assist in each one of those playoff series. And Brandon Tanev last year with just 1 assist in the play-in versus the Habs and just 1 goal this round versus the Islanders. Again, that 1 goal he scored this year was huge. It was the game winner in game 3 versus the Islanders. But just looking at it, like offensively, I love Tanev and what he brought that whole series. I thought he was one of the few players along with his line that actually showed up. Obviously, you can't replace what he brought in, you know, in terms of speed, grit, all that, but I'm just at the end of the day talking about production. You can find a player for less money who could just maybe have a little bit better playoff production, because at the end of the day, this is what it's all about. You can love the player, you can love what he does in the season, you can love what he does in every game, but when it's 3 years now and the Penguins haven't done nothing in the playoffs and these players really haven't done much, at the end of the day, no one has done much. But that's what I'm saying. These are bottom 6 players they're replaceable. You're not losing the Nick Bonino, the Trevor Daley, the Matt Cullen, who you know works and will be hard to replace. You're basically just replacing bottom 6 players on teams that are first round exits. That shouldn't be too hard. So now, at the time of the Jared McCann trade, I said I really wanted to see who they were going to lose in the expansion draft, just to see how much cap space they freed up. And now, with losing McCann and Brandon Tanev, they now have $7.5 million. They need to sign Zach Aston Reese, a few other depth players, Cody Ceci, but I've heard the reports that he won't re-sign, which sucks. But again, you can find replacements with the cap that you've saved up, or you can just look at within your system. You know, Poge can play full-time. Chad Ruhwedel can play full-time. I think you re-sign Czar because you already lost McCann and Tanev, right, from players on your roster. So re-sign Czar, make Freddie Gaudreau and maybe a guy like Zohorna full-time regulars next year and save the cap, because I think these guys are more than fine to be fourth liners on your team. But speaking about freeing cap space, right now they have $7.5 million. Apparently they were really trying to trade Pettersson and Jari. That was a report that came out before the expansion draft. Let's say they do trade a guy like Marcus Pettersson. They now save $11.5 million in cap. You can re-sign your Czar, maybe even a Cody Ceci, and still have, I'd say, maybe $7 million to spend in free agency. You could sign 3-4 solid depth players with that, or you can sign a big name, not a huge name, but like a guy who can play with Sid, a guy who can play with Gino, or even a solid number 3, number 4 defenseman. Really, with that money, you can do a lot with it. So there's definitely a lot of options you can do. I don't think the Penguins are done here. There's still at least 1 or 2 trades left to be made, maybe at the actual NHL draft or just before the free agency hits. That's what I think the Penguins should do, right? So just to conclude everything, right? You lose Tanev, you lose McCann, you're probably going to lose Cody Ceci. Realistically, I hope they could trade a guy like Marcus Pettersson. So that's 2 defensemen that you lose, 2 forwards that you lose, but about $11.5 million to replace them. If you do trade Pettersson, then I think you can target 2 free agents, and then the other 2 spots, you just rely on your system. If you don't trade Pettersson and you're just with the 7.5, then you just realistically replace them with the guys in your system and try and target maybe 1 guy. Or maybe you just replace everybody with your system and you just target a big-time goalie, right? There's a lot you can do. You guys know what I think, but I want to hear what you guys have to say, right? Throw all that stuff in the comments. And like always, right, it's going to be a crazy week. It's going to be a busy week for Penguins fans, but for hockey fans in general too. So it's going to be fun. I can't wait to see what happens, and I will catch you guys in the next one. Thank you so much for watching.